Well, hey everyone. In this Approaching the Scene, it's a real special pleasure that I've got my good friend Rick LePage, who used to work with me here in Printerville in the
That's right.
studio, but has moved to LeGrand and only visits on rare occasions and helps me out in workshops. We just got done in the Palouse. We're going to talk about why we think that the most important thing for your photography is not your gear. It's not really all about the camera. I think one of the most frequent questions that I get on, the YouTube comments for Approaching the Scene and through email and through my work coaching in the On One Plus community is, what new camera should I buy to improve my photography? And I think that my my answer to that is almost invariably studying photographs that you love, figuring out what the photographers were thinking, and just developing your own sense of what's important to you in the subjects that you're photographing, and honing those mental photography skills are far more important than what gear you're using.
Yeah, I think we focus a little bit too much on gear when we're out there in the field. We always want to see what other photographers are shooting with. I had a really funny thing at a bookstore once. I was checking out and I bought a couple of photo books, and the cashier was like, "Well, are you a photographer?" And I was like, "Yeah, I am." And he goes, "I really need to get a better camera. I want to take better photographs." And I looked at him and I said, "Do you have a phone?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What do you got?" He said, "I have an iPhone 6. And I'm like, "That is a great camera." I mean, this was at a time when it had just come out.
Right.
And I'm like, you don't need
No.
to go out and buy gear. That's not what's going to make you a better photographer.
Absolutely
It's, look around you. We're inundated with photographs on social media. It's easy to sort of look and decide what are the types of things that you like and don't like in photographs. You can go into any bookstore, his bookstore, and they have remainder books of these big, beautiful photo books,
Right.
that are, either from the beginnings of photography up till now or things from the last 20 to 30 years. And I've always found that going out and looking through photographs, understanding what speaks to you and what doesn't speak to you really sort of helps inform, where you go with photography.
And you wrote a really great blog piece, a good piece on CompleteDigitalPhotography.com, which is the site where Rick publishes musings and things about photography, and it's a site you should definitely go and check out. And I'll link that article because that interaction led you to write a really thoughtful piece about why gear is not the most important thing in your photography.
Yeah.
And I've shown photographs, I've given slideshows and lectures before where someone will come up to me afterwards and say, "What camera were you using?" I wish I had a camera like that.
Yeah.
and I try not to be insulted by that comment. It really comes from a place of people just not understanding that it's really about a set of choices about how you're organizing things compositionally in space, how you're working with light, the patience that it takes sometimes to capture a subject that's important to you. I've been on trips to places where it didn't work out, and I need to return to that place another time to use my gear. It's not about coming back with a better camera. It's about coming back when conditions might be better and rethinking the scene and learning from my mistakes and looking at other people's images and seeing what they were doing. Some of my absolute favorite photographers worked in the days when there was no light meter on their film cameras. They weren't worried about dual card slots.
No.
I mean, you think about Henri Cartier-Bresson.
Yeah.
And the images that he created.
Well, and that gets back to the know your gear. Understanding the principles of exposure and composition and how light affects the scene are all the most important parts of this. You can pretty much take almost any camera made today, put it on a tripod in front of the scene that you're looking at, and you can get a great image. But you need to know how to use the camera. You need to understand what are the principles. Do I want shutter priority or aperture priority? Do I need to underexpose, overexpose? All of those types of things. Every camera that's out today, even this, lets you apply those techniques in a way that will get you great images.
Agreed. The technology now is so good. I don't think that there are very many major camera brands that people are carrying around where even the entry-level cameras aren't significantly better than the gear the pros were working with 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's just a great time to be a photographer. But the key to it is not looking through lens comparison charts and sensor charts
And pixel peeping.
Pixel peeping. It's really about looking at what energizes you as a photographer, finding some things that excite you about photographing, looking through other people's images that you admire of
Right.
that subject matter, and figuring out what they were doing. And then, once you start getting in the groove and you're enjoying the work that you're creating, experimenting and branching out and finding your own way of visually telling these stories that matter to you. I think that the critical piece to all this is right here in the human brain, and far less about gear. I think, Rick, you spoke to a really important thing, though, and that's knowing your gear.
Yes.
Because if you're working with a brand new camera system, if you're working with a new brand, if the menus don't make sense to you, if you don't know where the buttons are, if you're having to get that phone that we're talking about out to look through the manual to say, well, how do I adjust this setting? You're missing it.
Yes, I agree.
It has to be an extension of you. And I will be the first to admit that, in the film days, I used Nikon cameras, and through the days of digital, I've mostly stuck with Nikon. I have flirted some with Canon. I've owned a bunch of Sonys. I've owned some of the Fujis, which I just love. I love what Fuji's doing these days. But the camera that ergonomically makes sense and feels just like I've been using forever tends to be Nikon. I understand the menu system. I know where the buttons are supposed to be. It's sort of second nature to me. So any other camera that I'm using and testing, I have a bias towards Nikon just because I know the gear. It fits my hand. I have muscle memory of where everything in the controls are. And, if you're loyal to a brand, you just have to know if you're switching brands, it winds up potentially.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It requires you to spend some time at familiarizing yourself with the next brand. And the biggest mistake I think you can make is jumping from thing to thing to thing to thing.
Well, and the other side of this too is lenses. How many times have we gone somewhere and you see somebody, they open up their kit and they've got, it looks like every lens. And that's wonderful. I mean, if you really are that type of shooter where you're going to use all of those lenses on a regular basis, or you want this type of lens for this situation, that's great. But I find so many people don't know the limitations and the strengths of the lenses that they have. And one of the things, well, two things. So two things that I do. I like to walk around with a camera, and I like to walk around with a camera with a single lens. And I shoot a lot of stuff that is never going to get shown to anybody. It's not going to show up somewhere. But it helps me understand how my camera and my lens work together in certain situations. And I can't recommend that enough.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And there's not a lens in the world that doesn't have strengths and weaknesses. And so I think, using that gear, testing it, test how does this lens work in harsh backlight? How does it work at f/16 in harsh backlight? How does it work wide open in harsh backlight? Does it in astrophotography? I see a lot of images where people are wide open on a wide angle lens, and there's a ton of coma. There's little bird-like wings coming out of the stars in the corner. Some lenses you need to stop down a little bit, use a higher ISO. It's just knowing those things about your gear, and it takes time. And I think, again, just the fallacy of thinking that the next great sensor or the next great lens is really what's going to push my photography to the next level. If you're truly a master with the gear that you have, and something comes out that pushes your potential to create better images in certain situations, particularly in astrophotography with higher ISO cameras and lenses that have less aberration, wide open, those kinds of things can make a difference. There's no doubt about it. But you have to be at a level where you're pushing the boundary of the gear that you have.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
To get that kind of a reward from it. So, I really appreciate Rick taking the time to sit down, have this chat with me. I think it's a kind of a conversation I've been wanting to have, just based on the conversation that I'm hearing surrounding the video series. And there's always so much focus on gear, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm a complete gear junkie.
Yeah, yeah.
I love gear.
Yeah. But I'd also say you're a professional photographer. This is what you do, right? You travel, you do portraiture, you do all sorts of work, But I don't need to go out and buy the gear that you have. That's not going to make me a better photographer. It really is not.
And that's a key. And I think that the marketing, the world that we live in, kind of wants to sell the alternative to that particular story. So anyhow, Rick, I'm really looking forward. We're gonna be teaching a workshop in Moab. I haven't quite released it yet, but this fall we're gonna be in Moab together. Rick helps with some of the workshops that I teach. He kind of picks his favorites, places he wants to go, and I love having him along because you have this great sense of just photographic history and composition, and you're a wonderful photographer yourself.
Thank you.
But you also have a really nice way with having a different perspective, a different view, and helping with students in the field. So if you guys want to hang out with Rick, we're going to be in Moab this fall.
Yep, can't wait.
And there's a link. I'll put a link to my site, to the workshops page, where you can request advance notice if you are interested in that. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.
All right, man.
Boom.